How was your last trip? Can you give the listeners and the viewers just a little bit of an overview of what you were trying to do in case they didn't catch our first episode that we did together a year or so ago?
All right, so the project is fairly simple. I'm trying to climb Everest in the winter by myself without oxygen via the West Ridge. So
Right.
actually, maybe it's not that simple. Huh? If I'm trying to explain that to like my grandmother, she's like probably already confused.
Yes. And how many years have you been trying to do this now or been working on this project?
Oof, good question. I started in 2019, so yeah, since then, huh? That's like three attempts and one attempt that actually failed back here in Chamonix, where I live in the French Alps, right next to Mont Blanc, with an injury in training.
Yeah, I remember following you through that injury. That must have been devastating. So much of your focus is climbing this damn mountain, and it was a pretty bad injury, right? It was a back injury?
Yeah, actually, it was a herniated disc. So
Oh, boy.
I thought that you get these injuries only when you like sit at a desk for too long. Turns out you can get them if you spend too much time on your feet as well. I did like really long training weeks back to back. I was a machine. I was so fit, but like 4 days before I was due to go on the expedition, I started to be in pain, and the pain was turning out so tremendous that I couldn't really breathe. Like I have a quite high pain threshold, but that pain was really intense. And I remember I was seeing a local specialist here that I trust, and she did some tests and she said, "It seems like you have a herniated disc." And I was in shock. I was like, "No, no, no, no way! It must be something different." Like I'm not old. And she sent me to the ICU straight away, and then I had some really tough times. Like emotionally, I
Mm,
couldn't like obviously I couldn't go on the expedition, and then I'm an alpinist, so it's what I do, like
mm.
it's what I love, it's what I'm passionate about, and that big part of my life just fell away. And my partner from that time, my girlfriend, she went on the trip without me, so I was left home alone. And I was supposed to climb a 7,000 of acclimatization with her together. So we're supposed to be this team and spending time together in process of my Everest winter attempt, and all of these things didn't happen. So I was devastated. It was really tough.
Yeah. I mean, I suppose it's better that you're find out you have a herniated disc at 1,000 meters of elevation as opposed to 6,500 meters of elevation when you're alone by yourself climbing up the West Ridge.
I suppose it's better, but I suppose it's even better if you don't herniate the disc.
Yes, for sure. For sure. So how did you recover from that? And did you manage to get enough training in to your satisfaction for this year's attempt that you just got back from?
So in the beginning, I couldn't walk at all. Like you have to imagine, my disc was putting pressure on the sciatic nerve, which is a very long nerve that goes from your back all the way down, like to your toes. So that leg was very painful and stiff. And I started with 2,000 steps daily, and then I pushed it up to 5,000 steps, which basically means like nothing. Like I do more on an active rest day than that usually. And then I followed my routines, went to see lots of osteopaths and physiotherapists. Luckily, I have a support network in place of people that I see that I know have great skill, and they helped me, and they helped me through this difficult time. And I slowly went back up, building the hours. But to be very honest with you, when I started on this year's attempt, I knew that I wasn't ready to go for the summit. Like I was lacking that aerobic base that was absolutely essential. I went from that peak shape due to the injury to like pretty bad shape. I mean, obviously, I'm a professional athlete, so I'm still pretty fit, but not where I want to be.
Yeah. But pretty fit isn't going to cut it when you're trying to do this, the highest mountain in the world, without oxygen by yourself with, zero safety net.
In the winter,
Yeah.
because in the winter we're talking about a 9,000-meter peak. The air is thinner because the cold air like sinks down the mountain,
Mhm.
and creates even lower pressure in high altitude and winds up to 250 kilometers per hour. Those are the two very challenging factors. And of course, I'm climbing a route that is very steep, technical. We're talking steep rock climbing, ice climbing. It's not a hiking route, it's
Mhm.
tough.
So if you had your doubts about being able to make it to the summit, then why did you go this last year? Is it just acquire more knowledge and more experience on that route?
Exactly. So, as some of your listeners, some of you guys might know, I have a different approach to this. I'm going to Everest like I go to a sports climb, which is like basically a cliff behind the house here that is very difficult. And I'm figuring out the difficult sections. I'm learning about the route, I'm adjusting my training, and I'm building skill. And so on this climb, I was particularly working on some new acclimatization protocols, strategies, and how they could work. And I did some research into combining climbing a 7,000 meter peak in advance and then going to artificial altitude, so-called normal baric altitude. It's like you sleep at a tent at home. It's basically like a big vacuum cleaner is like
Mhm.
attached to it, but it blows air into your tent that has less oxygen. It's like filtering the air. So it simulates altitude. But in reality, in high altitude, you're having the same percentage of oxygen on the summit of Everest than like we have right now while recording this podcast. It's just that the pressure is lower, so the air expands. But we mimic that effect by filtering the air and reducing the percentage. And so I was combining that with real altitude and did some experiments, developed skill, and I built a lot of knowledge. I built new prototypes together with Black Yak, clothing wise. I developed a tent myself for this expedition. I applied those things combined with the knowledge. And so to me, it was really all about applying that skill that I had developed to refine it, to become better and to ultimately build more skill.
When it comes to acclimatization, I liked how you described the fact that we're at basically 20.8% oxygen down here at sea level and on the top of Everest. It's just that the air is so much thinner there. Is there a difference in your physiological adaptation to sleeping essentially at sea level, but with less oxygen in the air, and being training at altitude when there is the same amount of oxygen, but just so much less atmosphere, so much less pressure? Does that change how your body adapts?
It does change how your body adapts, but something that you need to consider when doing this is your sleep, of course, is way less regenerative. So if you train really, really hard during the day, you're going to be less recovered in the morning. There's less oxygen.
So then how do you train for not getting enough sleep? Or is that just something that when you're at altitude, that's just something you have to deal with, but you shouldn't deal with that in your training?
Well, that's the balance in the end, and that's a personal choice. If you go to altitude, you get more hours all the time. So you're adjusting faster and yes, in extreme high altitude, sleep is shit, like you're not going to really sleep well. But in training, you might push much, much harder than you would push in high altitude. If you do proper sessions here, they can be very fatiguing. So it's a trade off. You need to decide, you need to build a strategy. That's what I'm working on right now. That's what I'm trying to build better.
So I'm not a physiologist, and I'm certainly not a high altitude physiologist, but I did see a headline recently about somebody trying to acclimatize for Everest by breathing xenon. It's a rare gas, and trying to use that as to stimulate the physiological adaptations to altitude. What's your thoughts on that, or is it too early to say?
Honestly, I have no clue about that. I could maybe guess that breathing carbon monoxide could be beneficial.
Monoxide?
If you breathe it in yeah, if you breathe it in small amounts, it would definitely reduce the amount of oxygen delivered to your body. But it's also very dangerous. If you
Yeah,
breathe too much of that, you kill yourself. It's going to be a sweet death. You're just going to fall asleep and never wake up.
that would be the ultimate walking of the line. So on this year's expedition, how high did you get?
I went up to 7,537.
So that would left just over 1,000 meters to climb to get to the top? Is that
1,300 meters approximately, 1,350.
what would that last 1,300 meters have looked like? Was that a difficult route, that last little bit that you didn't climb, or would that have been a relatively easy route if you had been more acclimatized?
This project just gets harder and harder the higher you go. It's the altitude that creates difficulty, but we also have some rock climbing at 8,500 meters in the couloir up there. So it's gonna get very challenging. There is tough rock climbing at the bottom, but there's more oxygen there. So higher up, it is challenging, and the hard bits are still to come. Going to that altitude was enough to break the current altitude record on the West Ridge, which was my goal for this expedition. I wanted to go a tiny bit higher, at least, than the highest ever reached altitude on the West Ridge in winter. And I accomplished that. I went like these 37 meters higher. But it's not so much about the altitude that I went higher. It's more about how I did it. When I went in 2019-20 on the first attempt, it took me 64 days to reach 7,366 meters, the west shoulder. And now I reached this 7.5 in only 6 days in alpine style, carrying everything with me that I needed, went in a single push. That's the progress. That's the difference. That's how development and building skill looks like.
So how did you go 10 times faster?
So, first of all, I have way more knowledge about the route. So, I know where not to go and where to go roughly. And then, I mean, I did a new acclimatization program, which I think was very beneficial. And ultimately, I developed better gear.
Okay. Yeah, it's amazing how sometimes the difference between success and failure is gear. I mean, there's obviously a lot of other things, but if you take the most experienced Inuit hunter in history and you take away all of his clothing and all of his hunting equipment and you put him out in the middle of the ice, he's going to die. Maybe he'll die a little bit slower than you and I, but he's going to die because ultimately we can't exist in hostile environments without the right clothing and without the right gear, which is not to denigrate the other things that we also need, which is skill and acclimatization and physical endurance and all those other things. You reported that there was an earthquake when you were up there. How bad was that earthquake? Did you actually feel it?
Well, I was in Camp 1 at 5,700 meters on like a rocky balcony. It's like a granite balcony underneath the big granite cliff. And like, I think it was like early morning, was still kind of dark. Everything was shaking and moving. And I thought, okay, maybe a big like piece of ice had collapsed and fallen down the mountain. And now that's what I was feeling. So I looked out of the window of my tent and then I saw just avalanches shooting down around me, and I saw like rocks falling down and like, yeah. Then a Serac tower collapsed not far from the tent, and a shockwave hit me and ripped out a window of the tent, and I was like holding the tent. The tent is shredded now. I um yeah, I lost the tent in the process. But then things settled down, and to me, it was clear, okay, well, the route is already a bit unstable in these sections. The earthquake signals that there will be aftershocks. So it's probably a good idea to like call it a day for now. And I decided to have things settle a bit. So I just went back to sleep, and then had breakfast, and and after that I descended.
So that would have made the rest of the route much more dangerous, I'm assuming. Like if you had continued on at that point, even if there hadn't been aftershocks, the terrain isn't, the rocks aren't sitting on top of each other as stably as they would have been 10 minutes before.
I think it's not so much about the rest of the route. It's really this beginning down there, which is like already pretty unstable. Like there is some rockfall, and there are some, like if there are avalanches, there are usually more there. So it's that beginning bit that was scaring me the most. And I, interestingly, I think just yesterday or the day before yesterday, there was an aftershock of 5.1, and currently there are lots of aftershocks. So I made the right call. It would be unstable right now.
Okay. So what's the plan now? I'm assuming you're going to try again next year, or you're going to continue the project next year?
Well, the plan now is to recover a bit. I'm honestly still a bit tired, like organizing everything, having tons of podcasts right now, and like just organizing myself a bit, recover, and then begin the training process and getting ready for the next attempt. I'm definitely back.
What are you going to do different, if anything? Not get injured, number one.
Oh, yeah. I'm trying. It's not easy, because it's my passion and it's very difficult not to go climbing, or into the mountains. But yeah, definitely that would be a high one. And then work on the training. Uh, like you can always optimize training. Always, there's always more potential to gain, and you can work on the acclimatization. So those are two things I really want to work on. I feel like the gear so far, I've created some really good pieces there, and it works. Seems to work. So now it's here working on myself.
What is the, oh, sorry, how old are you right now?
I'm 32.
And what is the age at which alpinists hit their maximum, would you say? If you look at the body of work required to create a world-class alpinist, when do they peak?
I would say in their 30s. So I'm there. I'm there right now. Want to tackle the Everest project within the next 8 years, I guess. I'll be in my prime. If you see very young alpinists, they often lack the experience. You don't see these very young guys succeed in like these tough alpinism routes, like journeys into the unknown and exploration and so on. It takes a lot of experience and maturity to like withstand that kind of pressure. And yeah, it's not easy. So but then when you're too old, yes, you got all the experience and routines and you're chilled and you build all the tools, but then you don't have the physical fitness anymore. So it's the
Yeah,
balance in the end.
yeah. So I wanted to spend the remaining time that we have left on a hypothetical, and that is, say somebody came to you and said, Jost, my goal is to climb Everest. I don't necessarily want to do it the way that you do it. I just want to get to the top. I don't know, 40 years old. I'm in reasonably good shape. I've I've done a little bit of sport climbing, but my goal is in the next 5 years or 8 years to accumulate whatever I need to get to the top of Everest. What would be the categories of things that this hypothetical person would need to work on?
I have one thing that I would recommend. I recently found this book that exactly works on the question that you asked right now. It looks like this. So it's called The Worst Case Scenario. You decide how to survive. It's basically one of these books where you need to make choices. You're like reading the page and it's like, if you like want to talk to Hans to hear his story, turn to page 103, and then I don't know, it will affect. It's a choose your own adventure story. It has 26 endings and only one will lead to the summit. So before you climb Everest, you can climb it in this book. It also explains the basics about acclimatization and everything in a very playful way. I thought it was very funny, so I had to get a copy of this. This is not a paid ad or anything. I just thought it's a funny book. It has some comic editions. I mean, it really depends. If you're asking me to give advice to somebody, it really depends on what they already bring to the table. If they're an absolute complete beginner and they have no idea, actually, this book is not a bad idea because it really like shines light on the basics. But for everybody else, yeah, it's just like a fun gift or a joke or whatever. And then obviously we need to define the questions a bit more deeply.
Well, what would be the general areas that you would be asking me about? Obviously, I'm guessing, what is my physical fitness level and how much experience do I have climbing and how much experience do I have in the mountains? Is that on the right track?
Yeah, I think we would figure out your experience level, how secure you are in using crampons, if you have ever ascended fixed lines before. I mean, you can learn a lot of things on the spot. In the end, they teach you a lot at Everest right away. And you can learn how to use crampons and you can learn how to ascend on a rope basically on the expedition. So the key factor here is your physical fitness and your mental skills, you know? Ultimately, it's not like, how do I say? It's not like 90% mental, 10% physical. I believe it's like 100% mental, you know, because you need to be motivated to train. You need to have the right philosophy, the right mindset to build skill. It's so much mental. And then, of course, that good philosophy will lead to good training and you being physically fit. You need to bring those two components, and the rest is easy, you know?
So we're assuming I'm a guided trip here. So roughly how much is that going to cost nowadays?
All right. So, if you want to go absolutely low budget, I would say it's probably around $38,000. And if you want to go premium, it might be around 120,000.
Wow. So what's the difference there? What is the difference between budget Everest and premium Everest?
So premium Everest will give you more comfort. So don't get me wrong, like I'm a winter mountaineer, so
Yeah.
I'm not so much in touch with what's going on in the spring season. I've seen it once, but that was like 10 years ago, to be very honest here. So my knowledge might not be the best on this, but from what I witnessed back then, it's like you have these big dome tents, there is a couch in there, there's a mini bar in there, like you have premium services, you might have a western guide that takes you personally, there is like basically lots of service involved, you will take more helicopter flights, maybe your rest period you will spend in Kathmandu instead of in the base camp because you take a helicopter flight there, you will have more support also on the mountain, you might even have unlimited amount of oxygen available, you will have a nice carpet in your dining tent at 6,400, I guess. It's about these things, and maybe in the end your expedition finishes with a nice gold bracelet that says summited or something like that, you know?
I I'm sorry. I'm having a reaction right now. Is like, if you're gonna do that, why not just bloody take an imaginary helicopter to the top and say, "Hey, I summited," and then fly back down? I mean, that seems antithetical to the whole point of the whole bloody expedition. And seeing as you're charging around up there alone in the middle of winter, I'm guessing you probably agree. Would you have any interest at all in such a catered experience
As a client or working there?
as a client? Jost, I'm a millionaire. I really like you. I just want to get you to the top. Here, I'm paying for your spring super deluxe guided trip up Everest. Would you go?
Well, can you also pay, please, for my winter expedition?
Yeah, okay. So that would be like your summer job to pay for your winter passion.
I mean, as a client, like me being the client, I wouldn't be interested. It's not what I'm looking for. It's still a huge time investment and it's not giving me the experience I'm looking for. Me working there, making money that ultimately helps me with my project, I guess I'd be more open to that. I'm also not judging anybody who does it. I can understand people. I mean, you want to see the place, you want to be there. I mean, there's nothing wrong about it. I would just argue it's not alpinism, you know? Alpinism is exploration. It's the journey into the unknown. It's like into the wild, you know? It's this rawness. It's not a prepared pieced, you know? And yeah, I don't want to say this in a negative way. It's just that I'm not interested in doing it that way. It doesn't appeal to me, but I can understand that it is appealing to others, and that it can be a life dream, and it can give something to them. It's just I yeah, for me it wouldn't be satisfying.
So how expensive is it for you to go do your bare bones expedition, where there is no carpet in the tent with a couch and a mini bar and helicopter rides? Is it any cheaper, or is it more expensive because you're doing everything yourself?
So it's cheaper in a way, but at the same time, it's more expensive. The problem here is that usually you would share the expedition permit with, I don't know, 10 other people. And then you have one liaison officer who checks that you're not doing anything that you don't have a permit for. And then you split the salary of that liaison officer, his equipment allowance, and his accommodation cost. But now I'm paying all of that myself. So it actually creates a lot of extra cost that I cannot split because I'm a solo mountaineer. And then I also have my own logistics, which means I don't have scalability. It's not. It's actually more expensive because in a way I'm very minimalistic, and so I organize everything for one person. It's only a little bit of equipment that I'm bringing, but the locals are like, look, I mean, this is not so much equipment. Like, we actually need to charge more because usually we'd bring more equipment. It's just like it works to a certain degree.
Yeah, and I imagine that a significant amount of your time each year is spent not mountaineering, it's spent fundraising and talk to people on podcasts to raise publicity for your next expedition, and that's just a fact of life. That is kind of your day job, I suppose.
Yeah, so what people usually don't see is how much time I spend in the office. And I try to minimize it, and I have already like introduced blocks. So some days I just train, some days I do some office work. But yeah, it's about organizing the logistics. It's about going on TV shows, like shooting film, like I did yesterday here the whole day, or being on podcasts. I've scheduled 3 podcasts today. The first one was 6 a.m. this morning. Somebody from Chamonix came to my place here and we recorded it. And yeah, it's a tough job. Like if you're in for the money or something, don't be a professional alpinist. Luckily, it's my passion and I love it. And I think that's what's making it great. But if there wouldn't be that passion, I guess would be so easy to be burned out.
So when we're talking about our hypothetical person who wants to climb Everest on a guided trip, you're talking about the importance of mental strength in order to do the physical conditioning. Now, I know in the past you've worked quite a bit with people on their physical conditioning. Was that Altitude Academy? Was that, am I remembering that correctly?
Exactly. Altitude Academy. We do physical, but we also do the mental approach.
So what is involved with that? Jost, 4 years from now, I want to climb Everest. I'd like to work with you just to make sure that I've got the physical and mental buttoned up as best as I can to give me the best chance. What would we do together?
First, we would do an assessment, a physical and a mental one. Like I would try to get to know you as good as possible and see what your strengths and weaknesses are. And then we would work specifically on your needs. Everybody's different.
What would the assessment look like?
So we would do like an aerobic threshold test so that I could see where your threshold is at, so that we could then calibrate your training intensities and hours and amounts to that and tailor it. We definitely don't want you to be in overtraining, but also don't want you to be understimulated. And then you might have extra challenges. Maybe you're working a full-time job, so you cannot go like I do 40 hours a week in training. Like then that's not sustainable. So we'll have to figure out something that works for you. And in my experience, there is not a unique, like there is not like a formula that works for everyone. It's always a unique tailored approach. And I've seen people that bring a great base and they are very strong and they're like physically they can perform, but somehow when they go to the peak, they cannot put the horsepower onto the street. It's just like somehow there are some things that prevent them. They might be, for example, stressed in their jobs, and there are some other things to work out. So I'm also there as a mentor, helping with these things, developing some tools. Yeah, you often, it's simple things and it's so obvious, but it's also you're having that, how do you say, um, you're basically having me there. You're like, like, what is it, responsible,
You're my
accountable. You are like,
accountable.
I hold you accountable.
Yeah.
Exactly, I hold you accountable. And that often is like making the difference already. You're suddenly like, oh shit, he's gonna see I didn't do it. So they do it. It's like
Well, I imagine there are a whole bunch of if I was training for Everest, which I'm not because my passion is getting to cold places, but horizontally into the north, not into the altitude. There would be a ton of questions I would have that probably seem so basic to you. And you're like, how can this guy not know this? I learned this in year one, but it's amazing. You accumulate knowledge and then you forget how much knowledge you have relative to somebody who's starting. So it's a yes, there's the accountability, but then there's also just the accumulated knowledge. And you've spent so much time at elevation now.
I mean, I do spend a lot of time at these elevations. That is correct. I would say there are other professional alpinists that do spend also big amounts of time, and they're also older than me, so they had more lifetime to accumulate all of that. But yes, over time you become the skill. Like, and so there are so many things that I'm not consciously aware of, but that I'm capable of doing. And then obviously, if somebody's like, okay, but like, which crampon would you recommend? Then I'm there. I help also with gear and with small things and how to use a pee bottle and like things that are like fairly easy but accumulated. There are shortcuts. Like, working with me means you you will be faster in everything that you do. It's not necessarily better because eventually you arrive at that solution, but I will save you a lot of time getting there. And you don't have to experience the pain of failure when, I don't know, you spill your pee bottle in your sleeping bag. You can just like benefit from me spilling it into my sleeping bag and telling you what not to do.
Yeah. Excuse me. And that would be through Altitude Academy.
Exactly.
Wonderful.
Yeah, that's like going to my website, sending me a message on the website, or send me a DM on Instagram.
Well, Jost, I know you've got a ton of post-trip commitments. I'm going to let you go. Thank you so much for giving us an update. I know I'm going to be watching your training and I'm going to be watching your next expedition. It's one of the highlights of my year too. On your website, you've got this amazing 3D map tracking software where I can see, oh, look, he's gone up. Oh, he's come back down. Oh, he's gone up. He's a little bit further. It's really quite an amazing vicarious experience. When would you be heading out the next time? Would it be December?
I'll be heading out the next time when I feel I've done my homework and I'm
Mhm.
ready to see some progress. So it might be next year, but it might be the year after. I'm
Okay.
going when I feel ready. I don't feel like I'm going there every year now to perform some publicity stunt or something.
Mhm.
I want to make the project happen and see real progress.
Wonderful. So then people really should just follow you on all of your social media platforms to see when you're doing your next exciting thing.
Absolutely.
All right.
Yeah. And if there's a question that you cannot Google, that's the important bit. Feel free to reach out to me and I'm happy to help.
Okay. Well, thank you so much. Und auf Wiedersehen.
Ciao.